Thanks for joining us for this legislative session, or this legislative review session. It is the last one for the 2023 session. It does end, I think, the end of next week. And so we're here to go through some bills that maybe people are interested in or concerned about, or to go through some that I reviewed and we'll kind of highlight and bring up. So we always like to start out, ask if there's any bills you would like to talk about today, or if you'd like to just jump into some of the ones that I've gone through. All right, well, we will pull up, let's see, there were some interesting ones. We have one that's being proposed on changing the minimum wage in Utah. HB 549. And I think this is a new one that came out even since yesterday. And so we have this, that one, it's going to require that the minimum wage automatically go up each year with inflation. So it's going to not just stay at one place. If you look at Utah law with what it was, it looks like our last state minimum wage was $3.80 an hour. Federal law superseded that because it was higher. But right now they're proposing that effective the end of this year, the minimum wage will be $7.25 per hour for everybody. But then come January 1st, 2025, they're going to start to, they're proposing that minimum wage be paid based on how old you are. So the older you get, the more money you make just by getting older. And so we'd have someone younger than 18, it'd be $10 an hour. Someone 18 to 21, it'd be 13. Someone 21 to 23, it'd be 15. And someone 23 years or older would be 19 per hour. And then again, those would go up with inflation. And so curious if any of you have any strong feelings on minimum wage, if it's something you support, don't like. Curious if you have thoughts there.
Quick, this is Rich Austin. Doesn't the minimum wage play into inflation?
That's a great question. So we're gonna, it can, if the minimum wage actually increases wages, then yes, that would play into inflation. So it'd become a cyclical thing, right?
Right. And I mean, what do the economists say? Is that true, or is it just a fallacy?
Is it true that it plays into inflation?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think everyone would agree that things could get more expensive. The issue that you run into when people evaluate that is, so Google, I think Google had 60 billion in net revenue last year or something like that. So they had an extra $60 billion sitting around. And they were complaining, I don't know if they were really complaining, but they were saying that if they were going to roll out this new chat-based search engine, I don't know if any of you have followed that or not, but there's new artificial intelligence out, something called ChatGPT, that you can tell it to write you a ballad on railroads, and it will put together a whole ballad on railroads for you. Or you can have it compose a song, you can have it write your essay for class, you can have it do all kinds of things. And you just speak to it conversationally, and it produces the response you want. And it came out in November. It's gone pretty crazy because of how powerful and accurate it is on things. But they were saying with the point with Google is Google says, hey, if we're going to roll this out into search engine services, we have a problem because it's a lot more expensive for us, to the tune of about $3 billion. And so from an economist perspective, if Google's making $60 billion, but its costs go up $3 billion to have a whole new form of search engine, does that really increase the cost of Google services or not? And there, I think you'd have fierce disagreement about whether or not that does. So to a company like McDonald's, if you increase the minimum wage, is it going to drive up inflation if it eats into 5% of their profits? People would argue no, people would argue yes. And I don't think you're going to get a consensus among any economists on what really happens when that happens.
I see. Okay.
Simply because these companies make so much money. But certainly to a small company, it's going to have a huge impact. You know, they're going to have to really increase their costs because most small companies are not generating 60 billion in revenue.
Well, and on a personal level, if you just keep making more based on inflation, then you have no incentive to cut back your spending, and so then you'd be comfortable spending a higher, like paying a higher price for products. So it would, I don't know, behaviorally, it sounds like it would not stem inflation.
Yeah, and I don't actually know that the point of it's to stem inflation. I think the claim is that inflation makes people poor, and so we need to keep wages consistent with inflation so that they don't get outpriced from being able to buy food or afford a house, kind of thing. So the theory is if we force corporations to always pay people a living wage, is one of the things I like to talk about, then we won't get these scenarios where people suddenly go poor because inflation skyrockets. If inflation is skyrocketing, then people have to increase wages. But again, it's this chicken and the egg thing of, well, but don't wages play into that somewhere, somehow? But there's also the flip side of just saying, well, look at the market right now. Is anyone even remotely close to offering minimum wage? I don't know of a single place right now that can even hire someone at minimum wage. The market itself won't bear it. You know, you go to, I was told that Panda Express was hiring people $18 an hour to start at Panda Express. And I see Arctic Circle advertising 13, 14 an hour. So naturally, as things have gotten more expensive, people stop working the $7.25 an hour jobs with or without minimum wage. And so it does create, though, the question does come, is this a way for the government to, regulate the economy, or is it a way to force corporations to keep up? What is it? Because generally, the other thing that happens as corporations like McDonald's are forced to raise wages, if you force Google to raise wages, let's say, and it costs them $3 billion, or it costs them $3 billion to invest in some new technology to eliminate a bunch of people, then it's not a hard decision to invest in the technology and then eliminate a bunch of jobs. And so McDonald's has threatened that in a number of places. They said, well, we'll just go to the kind of the self-checkout model, get rid of cashiers and get rid of people. We'll have more robots making food. You just walk in, type in your order on an order screen. You can see a lot of restaurants doing that. There's quite a few fast food restaurants I've seen that are putting in those screens. Banks, the credit union that I use here in town, they've remodeled some bank locations to not have any tellers anymore. And you walk in and there's a machine and you tap high or whatever, and then you talk to a teller that's based somewhere else. They're just in a call center or something. And put your money in or your check in, it spits something back at you. But you're communicating remotely with somebody. And so these companies are certainly utilizing that more often. And one of the threats of if you push minimum wage too high is when it meets the cost of technology, they just implement technology. But I was curious, I've never seen it before on an age gradient where it says, oh, if you're 18 years or younger than 18, you can get paid 10. But, oh, just because you turned 18, here's your raise to $13 an hour now.
Oh gosh. Austin, I just think it's terrible that the government gets involved at all in regulating wages. I just don't agree with it. The market will take care of it naturally.
Okay,
People
yeah,
won't work for, if people won't work for X, then they're going to have to increase it. And that's how it should work.
just let the market decide.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an
And
interesting thing.
to do it by age, I mean, this had to be a Democrat idea. Is it
Well,
sponsored by a Democrat?
honestly, the Republicans and Democrats are getting much closer on how they approach
know.
things anymore.
Did it come? But who sponsored it? Is it usually that
So
tells you?
it's Representative Brett Garner. I don't have any knowledge on him. Never interacted with him. So
Yeah,
um,
it's just crazy.
but yes. Well, again, it's interesting because I think he's trying to pay some level of respect to the fact that not all labor is of equal value. And so they're taking the position, I think, that younger kids probably aren't worth as much. And, in theory, if you're 23 or older, maybe you should have more experience. I don't know.
That really doesn't equate to value. I mean, it may, but that's just not a good measure.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because employers aren't supposed to hire based on age.
Right.
Age discrimination laws. But I think this would heavily incentivize some age discrimination.
Right, exactly. And inflation is a tax on all of us. It's just a tax. Only they put it in a different form. So, as far
Well,
as inflation,
if you put your money in real estate, inflation's a great thing. So
yeah.
maybe we all just need to.
Not now, but maybe someday.
Maybe we just all need to invest in some assets like that. Another bill that I thought was interesting, and this senator I do know, he is a Democrat, but I don't think this. I think a Republican could propose this bill as well. But it's a bike bill. It's a pretty simple bill, but it says that if you're driving a car and you come upon a bicycle on the road, you shall move the vehicle to the lane to the left of the lane. That's interesting. It says to the left. Oh, the lane the vehicle is traveling in. So yeah, you move over to the left. If there's at least one lane to the left of the vehicle, and the movement can be made in accordance with this section, which I think means safely that, but curious what you think if we should require people to move to another lane if there's a bicycle present, and ticket people that don't. If you think that's a good or bad thing for bicyclists or a good or bad thing in general for the state.
It's just our government telling us more and more what to do, how to operate in life. And they don't belong there. They don't belong there.
Well, one of the issues with the road, we had this come up with the police. I don't know what it is, but if there's a police car pull over on the side of the road, I don't know if people stare at it and then stare into it or what, but they started having so many accidents where people would crash into police cars on the side of the road that for the safety of the police, they said, hey, you have to start moving over. And more we're having trouble sharing the road, cars and bikes. And there is a safety issue. And I think in general, as a balance, I think it's proper for the government to have some safety regulations for the road. And I'm not necessarily opposed to the government saying some things that people maybe should or shouldn't do in driving. For example, speed limits. I'm okay with speed limits. I'm okay with some regulations about what you do to help people be safe.
The thing is, I always question how many people are actually going to do it. Therefore, how much impact is it actually going to have? And I wonder if they've done that analysis on people running into cop cars, because I remember when that was really happening a lot. But I'll bet, if they made a law about it, that it didn't change that statistic at all. That's just my guess.
Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, I certainly haven't followed those statistics to see what did or didn't happen. I know when I approach a police car pulled over, it's always stressful trying to change lanes, especially if you've come around a corner or something like that. But again, from the perspective of, I've seen a number of times where I felt, that probably makes the police officer quite a bit safer because there's not a lot of room on that shoulder. And so I don't entirely know. I know I've ridden a bike on the roads, and it can be quite scary. And people pass you close, people do things. To your point, the people that are passing you close, are they gonna move out of your way? Probably not, but then they could be cited, and there could be more, responsibility for them if they don't.
But like, then what do you do in a 2-lane road where there's only one other lane and there's other cars coming the other way? I mean,
Yeah, so that one you don't have to, because it says there has to be at least one extra lane that's
okay, at least 3 lanes.
for
in
you
other
to be
words.
required to move.
3 lanes at least.
Total. Yeah, at least 3 lanes total.
Yeah.
Well, probably 4. It's pretty common that if there's 2 on one side, there's 2 on the other.
Yeah. I mean, I know they
and-
have regs on how many feet or yards or whatever you have to be from a bike, to address this issue.
Yeah.
Again, I hope they're looking at data, because you can make laws all day long, but if it's not really going to do anything, it's just our government, messing around with our lives all the time. So
Yeah.
hopefully they're looking at statistics after they've made laws like this.
Yeah, and one thing I see as a potential, I could see this contributing to road rage of bicyclists. If someone passes them and doesn't pull over, and then there's a light ahead, and they pull up and bang on their window and tell them to, move over or something. And I don't know. It seems that when people feel they have a right to something, it can inflame conflicts.
I'm thinking about Emigration Canyon, which a lot of bikes ride up there. And it's already a nightmare because I've driven up there. For both the bikes and the cars, it's very difficult. But that's where it's the most dangerous. So if they really want to address, the most dangerous situations, I would say they'd look at roads like that instead of 3 or 4 lane roads. It just seems like they're getting a little carried away over there in the capital.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of incentive for people to find solutions to problems. They want to say that they did something. That's one of the things we as voters need to be better at, is not demanding to know everything they did, but being very okay if our representative did nothing. Oh, you didn't propose any bills? Great. We want to vote you back in.
I agree, Austin.
Right,
I totally agree.
That's the measure of success.
Austin, with this bill, the way the police are now, they're already so flipping busy, and they're not on the roads catching speeders. You hardly ever see them. It's not likely that this would even be a thing that the people would get cited on. The only time there'd be an issue would be when they actually hit the bicycle, and they probably enhance their penalty or something because of this bill. But I really don't see police taking the time to enforce this.
It'd be tough, for sure. Like you say, they're so busy. If you have a package stolen, if you have things stolen, they just kind of go, "Why are you even telling us? We don't do anything about it. We're way too busy for stuff like that."
Yeah.
And so it is one of my concerns that for the bicyclists, if the law gets passed, they feel they have the right. To Janet's point, nothing changes with culture. People still cruise by them. That the bicyclists start to get angry because they feel they have a right or entitlement to have these people go around them. And I just get somewhat worried about bicyclists banging on people's windows, yelling at them, different things. And just with our society, I'm always hesitant to put more things out there that could produce conflict like that. Especially when we already have the 3-foot rule that's, I don't think it's hardly ever enforced. But yeah, one of the assumptions that exists when you're a legislator is that a law will change something. And we believe that everyone reads the laws, understands the laws, and aggressively follows them. So it is, I think, one of the assumptions that we have to look at is it practical to carry out or not? On that note, one of the practicality questions that I had, there's a bill, HB 550 here, school curriculum requirements. And it's a pretty short one. And essentially it's saying in the classroom, you can't have any discussion on, it says technically that educator or their adult leads on sexuality, including sexual orientation or gender identity. And so you can't have it at all in kindergarten through grade 3, or in a manner that is not age or developmentally appropriate for students in other grades. So to me, in general, I agree with the purpose. I don't think we should be talking to young children about sexuality and things like that. But from a practical perspective and just looking at it from a teacher perspective, I think it's very difficult in today's day and age to not have some discussion on gender identity come up or sexual orientation. When a second grader walks into class and 2 boys are holding hands or doing something, and a kid says, something like, "Ooh, why are they holding hands?" or whatever. The kids are facing it daily and at their school. And I'm not sure how you don't have a discussion at some point on sexual orientation or gender identity when children around you are changing genders or identifying as LGBTQ or something like that. But I'm curious to know, again, your thoughts on that.
Did this law pass in Florida? This looks very similar to the one that was proposed, what, a year and a half ago in Florida?
Yeah, I know Florida had a bill that passed called, I think the media termed it "Don't Say Gay."
Yeah, that's.
And so, yeah, that one's been, they're fighting it on constitutional grounds and things. But yes, Florida did have that bill.
Because this is very similar in that it's. I mean, it wasn't that Florida said don't talk about this. It was, at a certain age level, if I remember correctly. But anyway, but I agree with you. Like practically, this would be impossible to enforce. Kind of like the other one where it says, teachers can't say anything biased in the classroom ever. Like it's, how do you avoid that? And who would enforce this?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't say, like you say, it doesn't say who's enforcing it at the moment. But again, if you come home and you'd have parents that are angry or upset about what was discussed, and then they would go complain or file a lawsuit, contact an attorney, contact the attorney general, who knows what they do. But I look at it, and again, I have great respect for saying we don't want people to be talking to children about things before they're developmentally ready for it. But it's fascinating to me that we'll say to a school, we'll say, hey, you can't talk to a kid at all about gender identity. But at home, these kids are watching cartoons that have gender identity issues all through them. And parents are showing them. There's a lot of young children that watch PG-13 and rated R shows with their parents. And I'm not saying that means that it's okay for adults to have discussions with other kids that don't have those. I'm just looking at society as it stands and going, it'd be great to be able to go back to this pure day when we didn't talk about these things with kids. But the kids are so ingrained in it. They talk about it themselves. They go through, there's all kinds of conversations that are inappropriate with young children, and kids are exposed to it daily. And so I kind of say, what is the balance here? How do we balance this to say, hey, teachers, don't be pushing this stuff on the kids. Don't be talking to them about stuff you don't need to, but give them the freedom to be able to respond when things are said and kind of guide discussions appropriately.
I think they should refer it back to the parents where these things belong. They don't belong in school, these discussions. They really don't. They should be having them at home.
For sure,
And-
but let's say a kid comes in and says, I hate Billy because he's holding Johnny's hand. A teacher's now in a super difficult spot of, we're not supposed to allow bullying, we're not supposed to allow different things. And so then what does the teacher say, in response to that?
Probably something more generic, like, we're here to respect each other. Doesn't matter what somebody's doing or looks like, or, the way it used to be. We just have to go back a few years.
But even on that, if you say, oh, we don't get upset at someone based on what they look like or how they're acting, a parent could say that that's something, that's a conversation on gender identity. And they could say, oh, you told them not to be upset at a kid. Well, I actually, I want my kids to understand it's wrong. Or
Yeah,
again,
but
just from the
if it's a law, then that kind of sets the definition.
kind of, but it's that the teacher, in trying to respond to it, has a very difficult time where they can be accused of allowing bullying if they don't do anything, or accused of breaking this law if they do something.
Well, maybe they have to just sort it out at the school, how they're going to handle it. It doesn't make it wrong to come up with this idea where we get that out of the schools. It doesn't belong there. It's gone too far at the schools, as far as I'm concerned. And
Well, again, from the perspective of the school, shouldn't be necessarily pushing one way or the other. I
Right.
agree. I don't think we should be having discussions in general. But my point is that, but there are children who were a boy yesterday and are coming to school as a girl today. And to a second grader that asks a question or says something or responds, we can say that we don't want these discussions in our school, but the discussions are happening. The kids are having all the discussions.
Right. Well, maybe they can still have them.
For sure, but that leads to this conflict of, well, so-and-so is feeling bullied, they're feeling threatened, they're feeling whatever. And the school has to take steps to address this somehow. Because there are children that identify as LGBTQ or have gender identity things. And so when we say that, it's kind of like saying, to me, it's like saying to a teacher, hey, we're going to bring an elephant into the room, but you're not allowed to talk about elephants because it's not your place to talk about elephants. Just let the elephant sit there, but don't say anything about it. And
aren't there other topics? Aren't there other topics in society that are not really taught and discussed in school? Religion.
For sure, but let's say
politics.
But religion isn't one that people, to a child, if you come in with a cross on, for example, it doesn't produce a conversation where the kid says, whoa, you were a boy yesterday, why are you a girl today? It doesn't have the same level of discussion point because it's not something that's society currently is focused on as much. And so, yes, there are things the school doesn't talk about, but that works because we don't, in general, have those things on our sleeve. I don't go to school with a shirt that says I'm a Republican, and you should be too. The kids aren't there. Those discussions aren't really taking place just because, from a societal perspective, the kids aren't massively engaged in those. And so the teachers don't have to respond to those stimuli or whatnot that are associated with those topics. The teachers can avoid those because the kids avoid those. So it's not hard.
I don't know. Wasn't there a teacher in the last couple of years who at least one that got fired for talking about politics.
There was
So,
one teacher that went
Yeah.
into it in the Alpine School District. She told all the kids that like Trump to go home or something like that. And had a big tirade against Trump that a kid filmed. And she got fired for that.
And there's probably others like that, but isn't this mostly about what the teachers are supposed to be talking about and not leading discussions on this particular topic?
And so
I don't know.
this is saying that that the LEA and school shall ensure that classroom instruction or classroom discussion that an educator or other adult leads does not occur. And so again, the question becomes, well, do you lead it? Do you step in and lead it at any point if you respond to it? And what do you do when you're dealing with these issues in your class? Because in the public schools right now, there is a lot of gender identity
Yeah,
discussions and things
Yeah.
going on. There's a lot of the LGBTQ discussions going on. And again, from the kind of high level perspective of saying, hey, the school shouldn't be pushing for or against, they should just kind of be letting kids do their thing. I'm in agreement with that. I just look at myself, if I were a teacher and I were tasked with following this law and the laws against bullying and the laws to protect children and the laws to the inclusion laws and equality laws and all those things, it starts to become incredibly difficult where I have to walk this very, very fine line and be kind of perfect in how I respond to every scenario. And very few humans can walk that level of perfection, I think,
yeah.
to
Well-
answer appropriately in every response, to not get sued for allowing bullying.
But right now we have the opposite, where I think there's a lot of teachers leading the discussion and influencing, and that I'm sure is what they're trying to eliminate.
For sure. But to me, so I always look at something, whether or not the goal's good, I always try and be critical of what actually happens with the stated goal. And to me, what happens is we lose more teachers because it's going to become so incredibly difficult to balance all these things and comply with these things.
I think if I were a teacher, I'd be relieved that I don't have to talk about it. And then they'll come up with a way of handling it. Hey guys, I can't talk about that. You can talk about it at recess with each other or whatever. But
Well,
I'm sure there's ways of deflecting from the teacher having to get involved, express opinions, influence, and so on.
so teachers will certainly adopt something, but what I see from an attorney perspective is they get sued, because no matter what, there's going to be a law that they're breaking now. And as teachers start to get sued more and more, whether you were silent, whether you deferred, whether you did whatever, my concern is no matter what their choice is, there's something they can be sued over.
Are they being sued now with it as prevalent as it is in classrooms?
So
Just-
well, and I think we do need to be fair to teachers. There are some teachers who discuss it quite a bit, but there are many teachers who have tried very hard to be very neutral on it. There's still a lot of teachers that don't discuss these things and go into these things. But as it stands, teachers can educate. There's not a express prohibition on when you can or can't talk about something. Because before we could trust people to follow general morality and be age appropriate with kids and whatnot. But I know even when I was in high school, my English teachers were obsessed with sexuality and they talked about it all the time. And I would have much rather they didn't have those discussions, and it wasn't included in curriculum, but they just love to talk about it. They love to bring it out in whatever book was being read and different things. And And no, there wasn't a law expressly against it. And, you know, I have no knowledge if every English teacher is that way or not. I would assume there's some that don't do that. But when it comes to a teacher teaching and having discussions, especially at the high school level, you know, junior high, those discussions happen quite a bit. But again, the problem is that when you're a teacher, you're trying to address what you feel are the needs of your students, whether you're for or against homosexuality, whether you're for or against a kid changing his gender or her gender. These issues are impacting the kids. They're experiencing them. They're trying to live through them. They're crazy confused. They're trying to sort through it all. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion on it still, as they try and figure that out. And so what I see is, yes, there are some people that have a very strong agenda one way or the other. And I think it's wrong for someone with a super strong agenda to push that on these kids, especially at the young age. But in trying to net those people and get them to stop, my concern is that we're going to significantly impact those that don't have a super strong agenda. They truly just care for the kids. They're trying to help them through scenarios, trying to help them resolve something, even if it's just, oh, you know what? Thanks for telling me you feel that way. Will you go talk to your mom more about it? We get into the scenario where it's so aggressive, so much pressure on these teachers to stop bullying. And the, you know, we had the law about proposed that parents can be liable if their kids commit an act of violence. And someone I was talking to the other day commented that they said, well, that act of violence one, that's only a step away from, you know, saying that it's violent to say that you oppose homosexuality, because we have a lot of speech that's being labeled as hate speech. It's being termed kind of violent type speech to be involved in hate speech. And we're putting the burden on parents, on school administrators to wipe out all forms of hate, to wipe out bullying, to wipe out these other things, which I have concerns with personally. But again, just from a perspective of when you put all these laws in the lens and say, okay, teacher, we're going to take you through teacher training. You can't do this. You have to do this. And you can't do this, and you have to do this. And we go through these different things. At the end of the day, I think a lot of teachers sit there and go, how do I do that in practice?
Yeah.
And that's my concern, is we're passing so many laws to address so many issues. They're starting to really conflict with each other, which makes it so attorneys can have a heyday and just go crazy. And then that makes it so that people start to really
Yeah.
get impacted and professions start to get impacted.
Yeah, no, that's right. I'm thinking maybe the best solution is going back to less government is better, you know, and let the parents take the kids out of school if they don't like the way that school is handling discussions that relate to that or something. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it used to be that the parents had a lot more control, and maybe they still do. But they are deciding where the kids go to school, and if they're, I don't know if they passed that school choice thing. I think they did, right?
They did.
I don't know if that would help so that anyone, you know, can do that, can put their kids where they want. But I don't know. That's just an idea.
Yeah, no, and I think
Instead
that's
of
a good idea,
government intervention, you know.
to say that parents have a right to opt out.
Yeah.
And that actually is a bill that's proposed. I forget which bill number it was. Let me see if this happens to be it. But they do have one that's proposing to allow parents to opt out. Yeah, so it's this one. It's HB 348. And so this was this rep's idea of saying a student may refrain from participation in any aspect of school that violates a religious belief or right of conscience of the student. And so the school can't require or incentivize a student to affirm or deny their rights or beliefs of conscience. They can't penalize them. And if a student exercises right of conscience, says, whoa, I'm not comfortable here, we're the parent. This one I actually, let's see. Okay, yeah. So the parent can as well in 4. So the parent can opt out and say, hey, you can't have these discussions with my student there. And so I think this bill is approaching it from that perspective of saying, yeah, we can't stop everything. Everyone's going to be offended by something.
Right.
But if it truly offends you, opt your kid out and pull them out into the hall or whatever while the discussion goes on.
Right, and that's really letting the market determine which schools survive based on that,
Yeah, and that is an approach that is more parent focused and gives rights more to the parents, and gives flexibility to the teachers, with the exception that I do look at it still and I go, well, I like this to an extent, but again, thinking about the poor teachers. So if a child says, hey, I don't want to learn about George Washington because he had slaves, and the teacher has to say, oh, okay, well, let me come up with an alternative assignment for you. And then another student says, oh, well, I don't want to learn about, whatever. I look at it and go, maybe people will never get that involved. So maybe I'm, have a concern about something that will never materialize. But I could see it being possible that a teacher has to create 10 different assignments for every class that goes through because someone objects to something and whatnot. So again,
I wouldn't do that. I would just say, if you don't want to learn about it, then don't learn about it.
Well, if you do that, then you can't test them on it. That's part of this. You can't penalize them for not learning about it. And so then the kids quickly realize, oh, well, I just have to say object and then I don't have to do any schoolwork.
Oh.
The kids will figure that one out pretty quick. Oh, you objected and you didn't have to do the test? Sweet. I'll object and I don't have to do the test.
That should be figured out a little bit better.
And so this again does say you can give the kid a, another option. But it's still one where I've gone, oh, again, I like what it's trying to do, but I do get worried about the poor teachers in practice of, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's difficult. That's putting the onus on the teacher, which is a shame.
Yeah, and then it's tough to create all that new stuff. But let's see. Since we're talking about students, I was interested in the education bills that came out. We had one, and this one maybe, it's one that could be a good thing, could be just a whatever thing. This bill, HB 518, is called the Human Trafficking Prevention Program. And the way that they're trying to help prevent human trafficking, which is a very serious issue, is it's mandating that colleges, universities have to contract with a nonprofit. I don't know why they have to contract with a nonprofit necessarily, but the nonprofit comes in to provide a human trafficking educational program to first-year students. And it requires the college to pay the cost of the program. But I'm always kind of curious about pushes like that, because the only way for an organization to pay something is to charge more to people. So I think that the notion is,
this is college level, right?
This is college level. And so first year student, you now have to take an educational program or series on human trafficking. And it's to teach you when you may be at risk to become trafficked yourself. And so they're supposed to teach what human trafficking is, explanation of the grooming cycle, how human traffickers behave, risk factors for becoming a victim. It says to teach a demonstration showing that human trafficking can happen to any individual, and then steps to protect against that and how to prevent and report human trafficking. I remember one of the things I hated about college was all the required courses.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I was curious if this is something that would help people, would, like, in theory, there's probably someone it's going to help.
Yeah. And even if they know of younger kids who are at risk, so it's not bad that people raise their awareness, because this is a real thing and it's huge worldwide.
Yep.
But my concern would be that they have to hire a nonprofit to do this, and the number of nonprofits that are pretending to be, good people when it comes to human trafficking, and they really are involved in it. It's unbelievable. So, that could just turn really into something like we've got now, where a lot of these nonprofits who say they're all for children, they're actually participating or funding or doing something to make the trafficking happen. And it's a sad truth, but it is the truth.
Yeah, there's always a vetting process of what exactly is the organization doing. But I think, and it is interesting to look at to say, why did they mandate a nonprofit? Maybe they have a good reason for it. But to me, it goes to a more fundamental question about the role of government. If I want a college education, how many classes can they mandate that I take information on?
Yeah, that's true.
At what point does it start to be, look, you can offer it, and it doesn't say currently that this is a required course for students. It says that they shall offer to each student the class, but it doesn't specify whether it's required or not. And again, maybe it's a good thing that people that are concerned about it can go take it, learn about it. But I don't know. I just often think about the role of government, and to what extent do we want it mandating subjects and other things versus to what extent should the market control that?
Right.
And I don't fully know the answer on that.
We
but it
sure
is
do
one that-
we just have a lot of state legislators and governor who really want to inflict their own stuff on everybody. And it's really coming out clearly in this session.
Well,
Not
one of
that
the
it
things,
hasn't before, but it just seems like they're coming up with all kinds of things. You must do this, you must do that. Unbelievable.
yeah, and there was, if you study law and what laws existed and what laws didn't, when America had a very strong moral code, a lot fewer laws were needed. And there are many commentators that talk about as morality breaks down, then the impetus or the push for more law significantly increases. Where if there's not a moral code governing people anymore that used to regulate actions and activities and discussions, then the law is going to step in to do it. And I think what happens is, as a society, just in general, people have a very hard time stomaching when they feel some egregious thing is happening. And people get very frustrated saying, oh, teachers shouldn't be dishing on Trump, and so fire that teacher. And people get very upset about these harms, and then they move to pass laws. And again, this is happening, Republican, Democrat, anything in between. What's happening right now is we see an injustice, or we see something that we perceive as a wrong or a harm. And our response as a person is, oh, I better go ask the government to do something about it. And all of us across the board have accepted, I think, the notion that the law should fix that, or the law should not touch that and let people do their thing and let the market correct it. But we have this faith in the market or faith in something that not necessarily everybody does. And when those views, but the overall thing is this feeling in general that as a citizen, I can't do anything about that. And so I need to go petition the legislature for help. And I think that when we talk about people's pet programs or their things, it's a crazy common assumption running through so many people right now that when there's a harm and injustice, the law should do something about it. And it's a very powerful narrative in society at the moment. And it's one reason I try and talk about things like this to say, what is our role as a people? If we leave human trafficking education to the government, why is the government proposing to step in on it? Maybe it's because we haven't talked about it enough with our kids. Maybe we haven't done our part. And I think that every time I see a law, one thing I like to ask myself is this being proposed because I didn't do what I was supposed to do? And understanding that if we neglect our duties to live a moral life and to talk about morality, if we stay silent on it and we don't take the efforts that we need to, the law is going to come in at some point because someone's going to say, I'm sick of this happening, so we're going to mandate a solution. And you can look at California as an example of that. They have a law for everything under the sun in California. It's crazy. But in general, they're responding to injustices they see. And they view the law as kind of the savior or the thing that saves people.
It's like the nanny state. Isn't that what that is, really?
Well, it becomes that. But again, I think what I'm trying to explain is that super good intentions of people can lead to that nanny state or to big government because people want to solve a problem. They want to address a wrong. And so they petition the government for help.
And
because that's where their faith has become.
More and more they believe government is there to do that.
Correct.
Because look how government has really put themselves right in the middle of our lives more and more. So
yep, and it's
enabling us to believe that that's the solution to everything.
But again, it's a cyclical issue, kind of chicken and egg thing of we as a people stop doing what we're supposed to. People get frustrated. The only option they have left, they feel, is to go to the government. The more that people go to the government, the more both sides start to feel that it's a shouting match and it's just made the loudest voice win. And to me, it stems from the root cause of the crazy fights we have with the federal government, the incivility, all kinds of crazy stuff going on, is that we as a people aren't stepping up to address and solve problems on our own. We again, Republican or Democrat, I have so many people come to my office as an attorney and they want the government to fix something or they want a judge to fix something or whatnot. And I'm often talking to people about, well, what's a private solution? Is there a solution to this that doesn't involve the government? Because if we turn to the government for everything in practice, the government will take that power willingly. It'll try to solve every problem.
And problem solving is something we really aren't teaching kids.
Correct. And we're not practicing it ourselves.
We're all growing up, not all maybe, but many are growing up not knowing how to solve problems. And in some cases, parents are solving all their kids' problems, so they never learn problem solving, the kids.
Yep. Because we want to do no harm, right? And so we don't want our kids to ever suffer. We don't want these things to happen. But on this note, and we'll end on this bill. It's an interesting one that they want to create a hotline in Utah that you can call to report bias if you experienced a bias incident. And they specifically define a bias incident to mean a hostile expression of animus that does not rise to the level of a criminal offense. So it means the government can't do anything about it yet. And so, but you're upset about it, you want to report it to someone. And to me, this is feeding this notion that the government's supposed to solve everything. Because now we're gonna create a hotline to say, oh, come tell us about it. We'll collect the data. We'll go through and do things. And presumably, I would imagine, the intent of collecting the data is to start to push for legislation or laws that do something about these animus or these biases that exist that aren't criminal. You know, we haven't banned them yet, but maybe the law should be looking at. And to me, this is a really concerning trend to start to say, again, it promotes the idea that we turn to the government for all our help and salvation. When I think we need to really be considering turning to morality, turning to a community, starting to talk about private solutions to a lot of these issues. But instead we're saying, oh, it's not criminal, but come tell me about it anyways. And I want to collect data on it. And
Is it anonymous?
the report,
Yeah, can they do it anonymously?
uh,
Because that'll really create a lot of unnecessary calls.
it doesn't say whether the person can or can't do it anonymously here. It says it's supposed to follow the national incident-based reporting system. So the federal government set up one of these bias reporting systems, but apparently Utah wants the info too. But the hotline is supposed to collect and publicly report data collected, but
Oh,
they
okay.
do make that data anonymous. But I don't know if the individual can report anonymously or not.
Can't you imagine where an activist group of any kind that's highly motivated and organized gets people to call in on one topic, one type of bias, racial bias or whatever, and so that they can influence what is later reported to the public, which will probably, cause all kinds of conflict in society.
Yeah,
I
because
mean,
this isn't a hotline to collect things about every time someone was nice to me.
right.
Yeah, we only see one side of the story here with this
Yeah,
type of hotline.
this is such a bad idea. Where is Utah going? Oh my gosh, I'm worried about the state, honestly.
Well, again, it's the law will always embrace where society's at. One of
Yeah.
the things to remember is the law embraces society. And as a people, I do feel strongly that we are turning to the government for our solutions to issues. And again, this is across the political spectrum. I'm not hashing any one political party because Republican, Democrat, anything in between, we are all proposing solutions for more laws, more laws, and more laws. And our leaders aren't talking to us about, well, let's be more moral. Let's talk about morality. Let's figure out how to create a community
Right.
feel again. They're all just
Right.
accepting that, okay, I can pass laws, sure. I can put more laws in place. We can do more and more and more.
We actually need leadership. We need leadership. I mean, real leadership, not this kind of, pushing papers and passing
Well,
laws. We need leaders who are speaking to people about, how they can solve problems and
and
how to get through life.
I certainly agree. We need leaders, but the thing that I feel strongly about is we're all supposed to be one of those leaders. If we don't do it and we sit around waiting for someone else to do it,
Right. Right.
we'll just be sitting around waiting. We need to take action because when we go through a legislative review session like this and look at all these laws,
Yeah.
it's very clear to anyone on any side, I think, that there are a lot of laws being proposed. Across all sides, people will agree, disagree, think it's good or bad, but the fundamental issue with it to me is the government's solving our problems. The government's solving our problems. The government's solving our problems. Now, again, we may like a law because it aligns with our morality for the moment, but the government's solving our problems still. And we're not acting as citizens to address or solve those issues.
Yeah. And we used to learn these things at home.
A lot of it, but
you
would
know,
also be modeled,
and
I think,
a
in
lot has changed in society just generally that has weakened that.
but even I think it's good to check in our own lives to say, how have I stepped away from that responsibility myself? How can I bring it back to strengthen it, to teach my kids, my grandkids, you know, whatever it is, to teach others, neighbors, people around me? How can I lead on that? And so as we finish up this discussion for the legislative session, my invitation is just to ask yourself, how can I lead a little bit more on establishing morality as the governing force? If we have a nation that's governed by morality first and law second, it'll be a very strong nation. If it's a nation that's governed first by law and second by whatever morality is left, it'll get to the point where the laws all conflict. People can't do what they're supposed to do. It'll become too stressful, too strenuous, and yeah, we're just left in a bad place. And so I think it's incumbent on each of us to help morality be the number one governing force in our nation, because it's the force that keeps people most protected. It's the force that keeps good present. It's the force that allows us each to not be fully controlled by other people and not lose our freedoms. And it keeps the government in check if we're moral, because then those laws aren't necessary. But I think we each need to look inwardly and say, how can I do a better job of that? But it's been fun going through these, talking through them and the issues. Again, there's an incredible number of bills. Pick one or two. Don't try and do everything. But really, ask yourself, how can you be a force for good? What's something you can do today or tomorrow or in a month to help promote something good? And then take that step. But I appreciate each of you for being involved. Appreciate your comments. And if you have anything else you want to talk about, we can certainly do that. I'll end the recording now.